looking at the book for a moment, just the title, help us with, I know it's very simple, biblical critical theory. Why that title though? Because I actually was in preparation for this conversation. I saw someone had posted a video about your book. So I went to watch it, and they spent the first maybe 5 to 10 minutes going off on the title. And I didn't think a thing about it at first. And I went, well, I'll ask him. So what is the point of the title? And help us to even understand, most of our audience isn't necessarily in the world of academia. So why do we need to understand or interact with critical theory? I think you've alluded to it already, but I'd like to hear more.
Yes, it has been a bit controversial, hasn't it? In a way that I guess I wasn't particularly expecting, but I'm not surprised by. So let me just reconstruct how I arrived at the title, and then if we want to do a little bit about why it's become a talking point, we can do that. So my first encounter with the term critical theory was in a unit that I did as an undergraduate called Modern Critical Theory, where we went through a series of post-Kantian, so 19th and 20th century philosophers and social theorists. There was a week on Marx, there was a week on Foucault, a week on Derrida, week on Kristeva, if I remember correctly. And so that was what I thought critical theory was, and that was the way that the term was used in the circles that I was moving in those days. It's a post-Kantian way of engaging with society that seeks to critique social norms, critique the status quo in view of a vision of how society ought to be, in view of something better. And that's what I think the Bible provides, and that's why I'm calling it biblical critical theory. So the way that I try and parse out that idea in the book is to say that these critical theories are doing three things. They're making certain things in the world viable. In other words, they become believable, they become possible for you. So one example from critical theory would be, you might laugh at the idea of a socialist revolution. You just might think that's never going to happen. That is absolutely impossible. And then you read a whole bunch of Marx, and you gradually come to see that, oh, I can get now how at least he thinks this is going to happen. It makes sense. It becomes a possible thing in your world. So it's made viable by reading that particular author. And the Bible does the same thing. So you know most people today would just laugh at you or just be really puzzled if you talked about the idea of trusting the promises of the God of the Bible. Like, what does that even mean? And yet, you know, you read the account of Abraham, and you read the way that the psalmists struggle with God, and you read the New Testament and Jesus, and you gradually come to see, okay, now I understand what it would be like to trust God's promises. That becomes a viable thing for me. I may still not do it, but I can see what it would feel like. I can see what it looks like. It's a part of my world now. So the Bible has made that viable. The second thing that critical theories do is they make certain things in the world visible. One, great, powerful example of this is the way in which 20th century feminisms have made visible the way in which women are unfairly and unjustly treated in ways that may not have been visible previously. So people may have simply ignored them, or simply not registered, not seen that certain ways that women have been treated historically have been very unjust. But feminism shines a light on that and says, look, you've got to notice this in society. Don't be blind to this anymore. And again, the Bible is also making things visible. You may have seen 1,000 sunsets in your life, but never have thought, the heavens declare the glory of God. I'm seeing something of God's glory in those colors in the sky. And then, you read the Psalm, and it says, notice this, like when you see your next sunset, remember, that is showing you God's glory. And it's made visible for you in a way that just may have flown under your radar previously. And the third thing that critical theories do that the Bible also does is they make certain things valuable. And one, I said, characteristic example of this from 20th century critical theories is that many of them really prize the transgression of norms. If there's a norm or a tradition, chances are we ought to destabilize it or transgress it or upset it in some way. That's a characteristic, a signature move of these critical theories. And the Bible similarly teaches us what to value in the world. So my pre-Christian self would have looked at you askance if you'd have said, you know what, in your life, serving other people is something that you should really seek to do. It's one of the things you should really value. I'd have said, like, what universe are you living in? Why on earth would that be beneficial to me? But then you can't read far into the New Testament or the Old without seeing that this is something that God and Jesus really, really value. You know, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And then in Philippians 2, you know, Paul says, have this same mind in you that was also in Christ Jesus, being in very nature God, and so forth. And you say, okay, well, I've got to rewire my thinking then, because serving other people is clearly something that's very, very important for God. And if it's important for him, it ought to be important for me. So this thing should be valuable. And so on all these different points, that the Bible is performing these same moves as these critical theories are doing, making things viable, making them visible, making them valuable. And that's the sense in which there is a critical theory in the Bible. I called it biblical critical theory rather than Christian or theological critical theory, because I think because of the spell that first Bible overview cast on me that I haven't recovered from yet, that the treasure is in the text. It is the Bible story itself that is the powder keg that sort of explodes into culture. And, you know, theologians can be helpful in pointing us to certain bits of the Bible, but where it really gets exciting, where the blood really starts racing and the heart really starts beating is in the biblical text. Now, I really wanted to make that the heart of the book, not this or that theologian, however, you know, worthy they are, but just to, in a sense, to get theology out of the way and let the reader encounter the texts face to face, you know, get their nose dirty in the Bible. And so that's why it's biblical rather than, you know, Christian or theological. And finally, I think that the reason that the title is a bit perplexing for some people is that there's a different sense of critical theory that's risen to prominence in our society, in Western society, particularly US society in recent years. And it's sort of sucked all the oxygen out of the bigger sense. So when people think of critical theory today, it's usually, certainly in the news media, it's usually Frankfurt School critical theory, which is a bunch of German and Austrian philosophers early in the 20th century who were using Marx to try and read culture. You know, we get this term cultural Marxism. That's what they were trying to do. And even narrowly, the idea today of critical race theory, you know, taking ideas from Derek Bell at Harvard in the late 20th century and other scholars and trying to read race through this critical lens. And I think quite understandably, because that's the only sort of critical theory that really gets talked about, that's what most people think it is today. And so, you know, they read the title biblical critical theory and they think I'm doing Christianity as Marxism or I'm doing critical race theory through the Bible or something like that. And part of the reason for choosing the title is to push back against that narrower sense and to make a case for this broader sense of critical theory for our understanding of society. Partly because I think if the narrow sense is the only sense we've got, we're going to find it very hard to understand what the critical theorists themselves are talking about. You know, it's like you cut anything out from the broader ecosystem in which it flourishes and that nourishes it, and it becomes really hard to understand that thing is, what that thing is. You know, we don't exist, ideas don't exist in isolation, they have histories. And so if we just focus on the Frankfurt School, thinking that it's sort of parachuted out of the sky at some point with all these weird ideas, it just becomes really hard to engage with it meaningfully and to understand what it's saying. And so I do want to to say that this broader sense of critical theory, this post-Kantian sense of what these different critical theorists are doing, is really important. And if we only have the narrow sense, then I think we're selling ourselves short in our cultural critique.